Okay, so this video is for Module 12, the second part of Module 12. So I want to begin just with a quick review of the first part of Module 12. So this module is on phylum Arthropoda. And so we, in the first half of this module, we talked about some of the general characteristics of organisms that belong to phylum Arthropoda. First of all, they have an exoskeleton. And we said that this exoskeleton is typically made of chitin, which is a carbohydrate, and then it has usually has some minerals in it as well. And the purpose of the exoskeleton is to provide support and protection to the animal. And we also talked about the fact that because the exoskeleton does not grow with the organism, unlike our skin and muscle grow with as our skeleton grows, or our skeleton grows as we grow, the exoskeleton does not grow, and so therefore it needs to be shed, and that process of shedding the skin is called molting. And we talked about how that happens, so that the first thing that happens is that there are enzymes that are secreted that break down the old exoskeleton. Then the animal will take in water, and therefore it will swell. Take in water and swell. So then the organism is bigger than its normal size because of that excess water. Then it will develop a new exoskeleton. And then when the animal gets rid of that excess water, then it has room to grow into the larger exoskeleton that was made. Okay, so one characteristic then for a phylum Arthropod is that they have an exoskeleton. A second characteristic that we discussed was that they have body segments. Animals in phylum Arthropoda had body segments, and those body segments can be a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And we said that sometimes the head and the thorax are combined into one segment that is called a cephalothorax, and then they have an abdomen. So these two can be combined into one segment. Another characteristic of animals in phylum Arthropoda is that they have jointed appendages. So their legs are jointed, and their antennae are also considered appendages, and those also are jointed. And then another characteristic is that they have a ventral nervous system. And remember, the ventral nervous system is that's on the bottom or belly side, and that's a good place for it to be, because then they have you have the protection of the rest of the body, and particularly the exoskeleton on the top. Members of phylum Arthropoda can have compound eyes, which means they're made up of more than one lens, or they can have simple eyes, in which the eye is just a single lens. We'll look at insects a little bit later and see how those, how different, even different insects have, some have compound eyes, some have simple eyes. Members of this phyla have an open circulatory system. And we said that what that means is that the blood actually leaves the blood vessels and it enters into body cavities, and that so that the cells are in direct contact with the blood. Unlike we have a closed circulatory system where the blood never leaves the blood vessels, but all members of phylum Arthropoda have an open circulatory system. Okay, so then we started looking at different classes, and the only class that we got to last week was class Crustacea. And the organism, the animal that we focused on that is a member of class Crustacea is a crayfish. Lobster is also a member of class Crustacea. If you've heard of a pill bug or a roly-poly bug, though, that also is a member of class Crustacea. So the crayfish, so a lobster lives in salt water. So they live in a marine environment, and a crayfish lives in fresh water. But they are similar structures. They have similar anatomical structures. It's just that one lives in one environment, the other lives in another. Okay, so then we began to take a look at some of the structures in class Crustacea. And let's see, I need to find some of these figures. Okay, so that's the internal anatomy of a crayfish. I guess I don't have a figure of the external structures of a crayfish. Spider, and this one is an insect. Okay, yeah, so I don't have a picture of the external structures, but you can look in your book to see that. So let's talk about some of the external structures in a crayfish. So in terms of body segments, a crayfish has a cephalothorax, and they have an abdomen. So they just have the two body segments because the head and the thorax are combined into one. And then in terms of their appendages, they have some small antennae that are called attenuoles, and then they have some larger that are just called antennas. And so those are used for feeling for sensing things in the environment. Now this, the cephalothorax of a crayfish is covered with a plate that is called a carapace. So this is a plate that covers the cephalothorax. It's kind of like a suit of armor over the cephalothorax. So it just provides another level of protection for the organism. Okay, then some of the other, besides the antenna, the crayfish has some other appendages on it, and these would all be jointed appendages. So first of all, they have chelipeds, and these are the claws of the crayfish or the lobster, so they are used for defense. They're also used to help capture prey, so they'll use them to grab onto prey, but also then they're used for defense. And then they have walking legs. And as the name implies, they are used for walking. So they will walk along the bottom of the lake, or they'll walk in the river that they live in. Then they have some other sets of, they look like legs, but they're called swimmerets. And they are used for swimming, but they're also used for reproduction. And you can actually tell a male crayfish from a female crayfish by looking at the swimmerets. So in the male, the first two swimmerets are larger. So in a male, the first two pairs of swimmerets are larger. So they're longer. In the female, they all tend to just be kind of feathery looking, but they are larger in the male, and that is because they are used in reproduction, and those swimmerets are actually used to place the sperm in the female during mating. In a female, the swimmerets are used, they carry the eggs, and they also carry the developing baby crayfish. Okay, so swimmerets are important both for swimming, but also for reproduction. Then toward the back of the crayfish, there are two structures. One is called the telson, and the other is called the uropod. And these appendages are they kind of act like a flipper. So they are used for swimming and helping to move the crayfish or lobster through the water. Okay, so those are the external features that you should know for the crayfish. And then we can start looking at the internal structures of a crayfish. The crayfish breathes through gills, and those gills are located in the cephalothorax, and basically the water flows over the gills, and the animal, the gills remove oxygen from the water. And then the carbon dioxide goes from the gills to the water. So the water moves into the animal, CO2 moves out of the animal. So CO2 is a waste product of metabolism, and so you need to get rid of it. One really interesting thing about the gills is that the gills are actually attached to the walking legs. So that when the crayfish walks on the bottom of the creek or lake, it actually opens up the gills so that it increases the ability of water to move over those gills so that water can be taken out and CO2 can be removed. And so we'll see that when you dissect the crayfish, you'll be able to see how we'll move the walking legs, and you'll see how when moving the walking legs also opens up the gills. Let me explain one thing about animals that remove oxygen from the water. So you know that water is H2O. So water has oxygen in it. But when we say that animals remove oxygen from the water, they are not removing the oxygen from the water molecule. Instead, when you have a pool of water, whether this is a lake or a river or the ocean, the atmospheric pressure pushes oxygen, so there's oxygen in the air, and that atmospheric pressure pushes oxygen. It's in the form of O2, a gas. The atmospheric pressure pushes that, applies pressure to the oxygen, and it actually dissolves the oxygen in the water. So when an animal takes oxygen from the water, it is using up the dissolved oxygen in the water, not the oxygen that is part of the water molecule. Because if you take these oxygens out of the water molecule, it's no longer water. You got hydrogen gas, which can be quite explosive. So just to clarify that point, there is oxygen dissolved in the water that gets there as a result of the oxygen in the air being pushed down by the atmospheric pressure. The oxygen gets pushed down into the water and dissolved in the water, and that's the oxygen that these animals are using. Okay, let's look at the figure then of the crayfish. Looked at the internal organs of a crayfish. I guess I already had that up there. Okay, Okay, so here is the internal organs in a crayfish. So first of all, a crayfish has a complete digestive system, which means that the digestive system begins at the mouth and ends in the anus, so complete digestion. So we'll follow this through the figure, but it goes all the way from the mouth to the anus. There are parts in between, but so the food enters the mouth here. Let's see if I can draw on this. It's not with this particular one. So the food enters the mouth, then it goes into the stomach. Then from the stomach, it goes into this digestive gland, and then lastly into the intestine, and then any waste leaves the body through the anus. So it is a complete digestive system. One structure, well, then let's talk about the cardiovascular system. So with the cardiovascular system, the animal does have a heart. So that's shown here in the middle is the heart. And that heart is inside a sinus, which is just like a hole or a cavity. And that cavity is filled with blood, so that there are these holes in the heart. So blood leaves the heart and goes into this cavity. Then from that cavity, it goes into these larger blood vessels. And then those larger blood vessels branch out, and then the blood itself leaves those blood vessels and actually goes and bathes the tissues themselves. So here we see the blood vessels supplying the brain ganglia. Back here, or here you can see this area called the green gland, and the blood directly bathes the tissues. So as we said, it's an open circulatory system. And that is how oxygen gets transported to where it is needed, and you have direct contact between the blood and the tissue. Once the blood has circulated, then it, while the blood is circulating, it also travels through this thing that is called a green gland, and that green gland helps to clean the blood of any impurities. And now remember, the gills are right in this area, like over top of the stomach. So as the blood is circulating, it would also pass through the gills and would pick up oxygen, and it would get rid of carbon dioxide. Again, the blood comes directly in contact with the tissue. The other thing that we said about an open circulatory system is that it's really dependent on gravity to get the blood circulated. That's not true of a closed circulatory system. So these animals if they get on their back, they have a difficult time keeping the blood circulating, and so they need to blood flow is impeded if they are on their back for too long, and the animal could actually die. When we look at the nervous system of a crayfish, similar to what we saw with an earthworm, their brain consists of a ganglia. So it's not a true brain, but it's a group of nervous tissue, and they actually have two ganglia that make up the brain, and then each ganglia has a nerve cord coming from it, and then those two nerve cords each have along the way they have ganglia along the nerve cord, so that information gets passed throughout the body along that nerve cord. So information can be sent to the appendages. It can be sent to the different organs. It can be sent to the eyes. So all over the body, you'll have those ganglia. So let me show you. Let's go ahead and look at that picture again. So here, this is the nerve cord is shown in green. So up near the eye, you see the brain ganglia. And then as you look at that green cord, you can see that all along the way there are these bundles of nerve tissue that are called ganglia, so that the animal gets sensory information all along its body. Another structure that is really important and is related to the nervous system somewhat is something that is called a statocyst. So these animals have a, could be called the balance center of a crayfish. And inside the statocyst, there is a piece of, there's like a grain of sand that is called a statolith. So this is a grain of sand. And humans actually have something very similar to this inside our inner ear. If the animal gets knocked off balance, this grain of sand will shift, and that'll send a message to the brain, which then sends a message to the animal's muscles, so that they will adjust and try to get itself back in balance, or if it falls on its back, they will try to get themselves upright. So the statocysts that contain that grain of sand called a statolith is a very important part of the balance that a crayfish is able to maintain. If we look at the reproductive system of the crayfish, so the crayfish are male or female, and so this, well, I guess they just call it a gonad here. So what happens in terms of reproduction is that the male forms the sperm in the testes, and then those sperm are transferred to the first two swimmerets. And then the male uses those swimmerets to deposit the sperm in the female. And this usually takes place in the fall of the year. So deposit the sperm into the female using the swimmerets. Usually takes place in the fall, and then what happens is that the female will store those sperm until spring. So the female stores the sperm until spring. And then in the spring, eggs are produced, and then the female will produce eggs in the spring, and then those sperm will be used to fertilize the eggs. And then the eggs get fertilized by those sperm that have been stored. Okay. Then what happens is that those fertilized eggs then get um, get they get placed on the female swimmerets. They go to the female swimmerets, and they will develop while on the female swimmerets, and they'll stay there for about 6 weeks, and then they hatch. So after about 6 weeks, they hatch, and even after hatching, they will continue to stay on the mother as they grow, and they grow very quickly during that first year of life. So they will, during that first year of life, they will molt up to 6 or 7 times. So they grow very, very rapidly during that first year of life. Okay, so I think that is it in terms of the internal structures of the crayfish. Okay, so then, so that takes care of class Crustacea. The next class that we will do is class Arachnida. And class Arachnida are the spiders. So let's look at some common characteristics of spiders, and then we'll move on to insects. Okay, so spiders have 4 pairs of legs. So they have 8 legs. They also have a cephalothorax. So the head and the thorax are combined into one segment. So they have a cephalothorax and an abdomen. So they just basically have 2 body segments. Spiders have simple eyes, but they have 4 pairs of simple eyes. One way that you can get an idea of what a spider sees, because they have simple eyes. If you take just a drinking straw and look through it, that they have very small simple eyes, and so they're the things that we have simple eyes too, but our eyes are larger. But because they have very small eyes, it's kind of like looking through a straw in terms of what they are able to see. Class Arachnida have no antenna. Spelled that wrong. Antenna. And then another unique characteristic of them is that they breathe through something that are called book lungs. So let's look at a picture of a spider. They also have a complete digestive system. So the digestive system starts at the mouth, here in the front, right here, starting at the mouth, and it goes through the stomach, and then it goes into the intestine, and then that long intestine that goes all the way to the back, and then out the anus. So they have a complete digestive system. Let's go ahead and write that up. As we said, they have 4 pairs of eyes, so you can see those up here near the front. The other thing that they have is that they have a poison gland, which is located here in the front, and that poison gland is attached to a fang. Okay, so they have a poison gland attached to a fang. Or the poison gland, yeah, the poison gland leads to the fang. So what spiders will do is that a poison is produced in the poison gland, and then it goes into the fang, and spiders will inject poison into their prey, and that either will what it does is it paralyzes their prey, and what it actually does is that it secretes digestive enzymes into their prey, so that basically the enzymes digest the prey, and then the spider just sucks it into its mouth. So let's look at this picture again. So here is the mouth right here, and then here's the poison gland with the in the front. Here is the poison gland and the fang. So the poison gets injected into the prey, that paralyzes it, digestive enzymes break it down, and then the spider can just suck it right into its mouth, and then it enters the digestive system. That's one way that spiders can catch their prey, is by they have these fangs that they will use to catch their prey. But another way that they catch their prey, as you're probably aware of, is by weaving a web. So they have these silk glands that produce the silk, and then they have the spinnerets that spin the silk. We'll look at those in just a moment on the figure. So silk glands produce the silk, and spinnerets then use that silk to weave a web. And then that web is used to capture prey. So again, back here in the back, you can see the silk glands in this blue color. Down near the bottom, it says silk glands. And then the spinnerets near the back are used to spin the web. One other way that spiders, so they will use their fangs to inject poison. And some spiders actually will stalk their prey, and then they'll pounce on them, and then use their fangs and the poison gland to paralyze their prey. So some spiders will pounce on their prey. Then we already mentioned these book lungs that a spider has. So there are slits in the abdomen, and the air enters through these slits in the abdomen. And then once the air gets inside, then it moves across these book lungs, and they're called book lungs because it really looks like pages of a book. And so as the air comes in and moves across these book lungs, it takes the oxygen out of the air and it removes the carbon dioxide, so that can be extracted. So let's look at a picture here. So right down here in the bottom, you see this structure here that is called a book lung. So there are slits in the abdomen. So you can't see them here, but there'll be slits in the abdomen through which air will enter, and then it will flow. That air will flow over these book lungs. Okay, so I guess that's all we will say about the spider, or class Arachnida. And then the last class that we need to do is class Insecta. Or the insects. And this class makes up 75% of the animals in the animal kingdom. So the vast majority of kingdom Animalia are insects. So what are the characteristics of insects? Well, one characteristic of insects that you maybe already know is that they have 3 pairs of legs. So insects all have 6 legs. A second characteristic is that they have wings at some point, at some stage of their life. They may not have it during all the stages, and some of them only have it during like the larval stage, but at some stage of their life they will have wings. They only have 1 pair of antennae. One pair of antennae. And they have 3 separate body segments. So they have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And we can expand on this leg. So they have jointed legs. which is true of all arthropods. So they have jointed legs that are used for walking. And if we look at as you look at different organisms, if you look at different insects within class Insecta, the legs, even though they all have 6 legs, those legs vary a lot depending on the insect and what those legs are used for. So some insects have very long and powerful front legs that are used to capture prey. Flies have sticky pads on their legs so that they can walk on different subsurfaces and even walk upside down. Some legs are used for leaping. Some legs, if you've ever seen the water striders that go along the water, those legs actually allow them to be able to walk on the surface of water. Some insects use their legs for sound. So there are a lot of every insect has 6 legs, but those legs will differ depending on the functions of those legs. If we look at the wings of an insect, remember that we said that insects have wings at some point in their lives, and so there's different types of, there are wings that look like membranes, and so they are very thin, they're transparent, and so you can see through them, and you can actually, for many of them, you can see the veins that run through them. Other wings are more leather-like. So if you've ever seen like a leather-like type of wing would be one that it actually looks like it's part of the exoskeleton. And so beetles would be an example of a type of insect that has a leather-like wing. And then there are other insects whose wings are more scaly. So again, depending on the function of those wings, they will look different in different types of insects. Okay, so let's look at the internal anatomy of an insect. Okay, so here is a grasshopper, and you will see that some of these structures they're going to be similar from animal to animal within the arthropods, and then within the classes within the arthropod. So we talked a little bit about different functions of legs. So in this grasshopper, the front legs are used more for walking. The back legs are used more for jumping. Grasshoppers will chew, and so they actually have a jaw that is called a mandible. It's the same word that we use for your lower jaw, and it's used for chewing. And I don't know if any of you have ever read The Little House on the Prairie books, and there was one time in one of those books there was an infestation of grasshoppers that ate the wheat, and they could literally hear there were so many of them that they could hear them chewing the wheat as they landed on their wheat field and just decimated the whole crop. Some, like the grasshopper, are able to chew, but then there are other insects that don't have mandibles, and they have something that's able to puncture and suck. So, for example, a butterfly has a structure that is called a proboscis. That's how you spell it. That's used more for, it's used more like a straw for sucking things up. Flies have a mouth that acts sort of like a sponge, so they kind of soak up their food. So again, different insects have different ways of getting the food into their bodies. But however, once that food is into the body, they do have a complete digestive system. So however the food gets into the body, then it goes through a crop and a gizzard, goes into the stomach, and then into the intestine and out the anus. So they do have a complete digestive system, like we have seen in other members of the arthropods. We see here they have a if we look at their circulation and respiratory system, so you see along the top they have a dorsal blood vessel, and they also have a let's see, I guess that's all I wanted to say then about I think that's all I wanted to say about the circulation and respiration. So they do have an open circulatory system, so blood actually leaves this dorsal blood vessel and directly bathes the tissue, comes in contact with the tissue. Oh, one other thing that these organisms have that they have these a series of tubes throughout their body. So they have a network of trachea, and those trachea. So your trachea is called like your windpipe. So these network of trachea, and then there are small holes in the exoskeleton. So insects, they don't have book lungs like the spiders, and they don't have gills like the crayfish, but they breathe through these small holes that are in the exoskeleton. So the oxygen can move in to the insect, and carbon dioxide can move out of the insect. Okay. Another structure that they have that we'll see in this figure is this Malpighian tubules. So we see them right here. Here's down here along the bottom, Malpighian tubules, and what they do we'll look at that picture again in just a moment. So what they do is they clean the blood of waste products. So in some senses, they're sort of like our kidneys. And then that waste products, in this case, gets eliminated through the anus. So I want to show you where those are located, so you can see that it makes sense that they are for what they do, for where they're located. So they're right here. You can down here along the bottom, Malpighian, and they are right where the stomach and the intestine interact. So here's the stomach here, and the intestine is back here. So stomach here, intestine here, and those. So right there, these Malpighian tubules will clean the blood, and then you can see that then it would flow into the rectum and out the anus. Insects have, they can have either simple or compound eyes, and it really depends on what they want those eyes to do. Simple eyes are best at just seeing light, and compound eyes are more for detecting actual images. So it doesn't matter what kind of light, what kind of eyes they have. Any information that is gleaned from the eyes would then be sent to the ventral nerve cord, and then the insect uses that information to get information. This ventral nerve cord is receiving information about, receiving information about sight, it's receiving information about touch, sound, vibrations, all of that, all those sensory information, smell, some insects can smell, and all of that is sent through the ventral nerve cord to provide the sensory information for insects. In terms of reproduction, so females receive the eggs from the male and store them. I'm sorry, not eggs. Females receive the sperm from the males and store them. And then when the female lays the egg, then the female lays the eggs, and then the sperm will fertilize the eggs. So she has already stored the sperm, and they are used to fertilize the eggs that she has laid. So in terms of the development of the, so once the egg is fertilized, then that stage of development is called the egg stage. Then the insects will go through different phases. The next phase that they go through is a larval phase or larval stage. And in the larval stage, the larval stage in most insects tends to look like a worm. Then they go through in this stage, basically what they do is they eat and they molt. So they eat and they molt, and that's how they grow during the larval stage, and then they will eventually reach the pupa stage. So they will form some kind of casing around themselves. And then while they are in that pupa stage is when they go through a transformation, and then they will emerge in their adult form. And then they come out in their adult form. So the term that we use for this is metamorphosis. 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 I should write that all in one word for you to see. I'm sure it's a word that you're familiar with. So metamorphosis. And of course, we're all very familiar with the butterfly that goes from an egg to a caterpillar that looks like a worm. Then the caterpillar will weave a chrysalis and then will emerge from the chrysalis as an adult butterfly. Now, there are actually two types of metamorphosis. There is complete metamorphosis. And in complete metamorphosis, the insect goes in complete metamorphosis, the insect goes through 4 stages. So they go through an egg stage, and then a larval stage, and then a pupa stage, and then the adult. But some insects also have incomplete metamorphosis. And for those, they go through just 3 stages. So they go through an egg stage, and then they go through the lymph stage or nymph stage, and then the adult stage. So the egg and the adult stage are very similar to what is seen in other organisms. What does the nymph stage looks like? Well, in the nymph, they basically look like a miniature adult. However, they have no wings, so it's a miniature adult without wings and without reproductive organs, without wings or reproductive organs. And usually what happens is the insect will molt several times during the nymph stage and just keep growing, and as it grows it will develop wings and reproductive organs. So it's considered an adult when it has developed wings and when it has developed the reproductive organs. Praying mantis is an example of an organism that does incomplete metamorphosis. So a praying mantis just goes from the egg stage, then it goes into the nymph stage that looks a lot like the adult, and then it will go into the adult stage. Okay, I think that is all that we will do. Your book does talk about a few orders of insects, so it talks about butterflies and beetles and ants. We really don't have time to go into the detail on all of those different classes, so I think that we will stop there for chapter 13, chapter 12, which is class or phylum Arthropoda.